Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. I wanted to make a video today because of some of the more recent changes which have happened in War Thunder to do with economy and also play. So in War Thunder recently, a ton of tank destroyers got changed to being light tanks, and also a ton of tank destroyers got changed into being medium tanks. This actually helps them quite a lot because it basically means that they can get access to scouting, it means that they can get access to artillery, and the mediums can get access to artillery. Yes, it changes their SP costs a little bit, but the main thing is they are now more useful around the battlefield. They have more strings to their bow. But then there is a set of vehicles that have not got any new modifications, they have not got any new ideas to them, and they've basically been this way since they've been added to the game, and they make absolutely no sense to me. And as a person who is very big into spading things, if you don't know what spading is, it's getting all the modifications on a vehicle. I've played plenty of these things, and they've never ever been fun to me, because you are always at a disadvantage against the enemies that you fight. What I'm talking about is the boxes. The boxes range from many of the different vehicles in the game. You hardly ever see them in-game, because basically hardly anybody uses them, because there are much better options around the BRs that they sit at. Examples of boxes are M113A1s, so the TOW. The CM25 is another one, which is an example. The M113A1 TOW, which is also in the Italian tech tree, the Chinese tech tree as well, and then obviously the PV-RBV, which is in the Swedish tech tree, which I have spaded, and then you could even lump stuff such as the Swingfire and even the Striker into this, just because of their very odd way of firing. Basically vehicles which don't have a lot of armor, which don't have a low profile, which have access to ATGMs, which are their main armament. These vehicles are really, really hard to play when it comes to the game, because they're at BRs where there are just better vehicles than them, which you get beaten up by. And I don't actually think the BR would actually fix them. Going down in BR still means that you have fundamental issues when it comes to the vehicles. What needs to happen is a restructuring of them so they actually get access to something which is a bit useful. Kind of like the Type 60 ATM. Probably the worst box that we have, because of the way that the ATGMs are set up, the ATGMs themselves, and also the fact that they're keyboard guided. It got access to scouting a while back to make it a bit more useful. But the M113A1 TOW, the CM25, and also the PVR-BV, and all of the other boxes with ATGMs do not get this luxury. The fact is, at around 8.0 or 8.3, you can get access to IFVs. To give you an example, the M3 Bradley is at 8.0. We can do a comparison between the 8.0 M3 Bradley and the M113A1 TOW to show you how using the TOW is just really, really bad. So the M3 Bradley has more armor, it has more engine power, so it can actually climb hills. It also has access to a 25mm chain gun, which fires APDS, which is a good fire rate. It's a multi-purpose gun, can annihilate the sides of tanks that it faces, and also can go after other targets. It also gets access to scouting, it gets gunner thermals, it gets artillery, it gets access to smoke in the form of VSS and smoke grenades, and also decent mobility and a little bit of armor. The M113A1 TOW, which is at exactly the same BR as the M3 Bradley, gets access to none of the features that I just talked about, and the only thing it gets access to is a 50 cal and a ITOW, so a slightly upgraded TOW. ATGM, where the Bradley gets access to a launcher which you can fire on the move, with a standard tow, which is good enough to penetrate pretty much anything you find, and can also fire 2 at the same time before reloading, whereas the M113A1 cannot. It can only fire 1, then you have an 11.5 second reload before you fire another, meaning that you get out reloaded by pretty much every other vehicle that you see on the battlefield. You also only get access to NVDs, you don't get scouting, you don't get artillery, you don't get anything. So the only thing the M113A1 tow has over the Bradley is it gets an ITOW instead of a tow. These are at the same BR. Do you see the issue here when it comes to this vehicle? And the reason why I don't think these vehicles have gone down in BR is because nobody plays them. I've been spading them very slowly over the periods of time. You know, I'm about halfway through the M113A1. I'm halfway through the CM25. The Italian one is actually an end-of-the-line vehicle, so no, I'm not going to touch it. Its modification costs are way too high, and there are such much better machines to play than the machine itself. And it just ends up in this scenario where I think while I was playing the Chinese versions, I only saw one other actual like tow launcher machine, which was the CM25. Now the CM25 does get access to the tow 2B, so it is a little bit better than the other machines that you have, but it still is nowhere near as comparable as the IFVs that you have at 8.0 or 8.3, which do everything you do, but better. Another issue with these machines is the gunner of them is exposed. So even if you hit the driver or hit the gunner or hit anywhere on the opposing machine, if you don't one-shot them, then what happens is you get machine gunned to death. Because your gunner dies and then you have that long reload, then your gunner has to be replaced and then you just die. It's kind of as simple as that. Or you actually get machine gunned through the armor, because the armor is incredibly thin, especially on the sides where it's only 44mm, so autocannons will tear you apart. Another thing is with the overpressure mechanic, which has just been added, which definitely doesn't favor vehicles which have holes in them. It actually annihilates them. Guess what all of these machines have? Well, they have a hole where the gunner comes out, so you get annihilated by artillery too, since your vehicles aren't very light. So you have all, they are light, unfortunately, when it comes to their armor. So you have all of these issues with these vehicles, and the majority of the time they come up against stabilized vehicles with access to APF SDS or access to heat, which can one-shot you both sides. And since your target is quite small and all of your crew is bunched up in itself, it is really hard to use the vehicle in a useful way. The only area of the game where these vehicles can shine and do well in is on large maps in open areas, because you can set up near cap points, maybe about 1 kilometer away from them, and you can use your ATGM to be able to hit targets at range as they're coming in. Now, what this does is it puts an area of separation between you and whatever you're killing. Therefore, you're able to get the shot off without it noticing you and pop it before you're going in. There was also another nerf which was done to these machines, or ATGMs in general. I think it was last year, where ATGMs now follow the optics of the vehicle. So if you actually have any damage to the system itself, you cannot guide the ATGM to the designated target. Let's say like your horizontal is taking out, or your vertical. This means that you are even more useless compared to a lot of targets, and also it means that you can't pull the ATGMs as hard as you used to be able to, meaning that accuracy can be an issue. You are stuck to how quickly the gunner can turn instead of how quickly the ATGM can go. So because its only real use is on large maps, and because of the map rotation filter, where the majority of the time you don't see large maps, because the general player base that plays around these BRs prefer medium and small maps, it seems, when you're actually going into matchmaking, you are completely useless in these vehicles. I basically trade 1-for-1 with these vehicles, so, you know, 1 kill for 1 death, when generally my stats indicate that I normally trade 2 or 2.5 to 1 in pretty much any other vehicle, showing their real unfortunateness. Another thing that happens quite a lot is when you actually fire the ATGM, people will notice that you fired it, they will quickly react, and because you can't move while guiding the ATGM, you have to expose yourself to be able to fire it, and they just turn their guns, shoot you before your ATGM actually gets there, because their gun is a lot faster than the ATGM, and then you die anyway. So the best that you can hope for is, of course, a trade kill. Now, how do we fix these things? Well, at least right now, to give them a little bit more use, give them access to scouting, give them access to artillery, just like a lot of tank destroyers did when they got changed to light tanks. You don't have to change them to light tanks because they're not. Just either create a new set, such as ATGM launchers instead of tank destroyers, or just give them scouting like you have the Type 60 ATM. Give them an actual use, which means they don't have to expose themselves to the enemies to actually do something, and make them easier to grind, because these are the hardest vehicles in the game to research through, and a lot of people just don't do it. I'm sure the stats say that, I'm sure the gameplay says that. It's just not a fun experience to get annihilated by everything around. There has to be a fix, and for me personally, I think that is the one I would go for. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd like to thank BRFC, Swollen Ostrich, Teddy, John Ryman, Universe, Conte Baraka, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Lafouche, Barine, and Samuel Schlick for supporting the channel.